Still thinking about the notion of challenge and support that happens with young adults, and particularly in college. Uh, Four more things here we would throw in. First of all, the balance of structure and flexibility. We talked about challenge and support. Well, we also need a balance of structure and flexibility, which is very close to challenge and support, but maybe a little bit different. For example, if you think about the way a college student plans their degree or does their registration for a semester. Um, we're going to start that here at on campus pretty soon, so that's kind of on my mind. It's nice to have things that student chooses and decides and makes happen on their own. But it's also nice to have some structure where the department or the university or the program says, well, you're going to take these classes. And so almost all of our programs are built in such a way that we say you're going to take these courses, but you'll have this many electives, or that you have this many choices. We like choices, and choices make us feel like we're in charge. And so we need to do that some, but we don't need to just say to an 18-year-old or even a 22-year-old when they're in college, hey, just take anything you want to, and maybe it'll turn into a 130-hour degree at some point. We provide some level of structure and some level of flexibility, and that's always healthy for young adulthood. The second thing on this list is monitoring. This is one of those challenge and support questions. How much do we monitor? How much do we watch people? Here on campus at HSU, we have a system in place where we and it's been called different things over time, but we have a system in place where if a freshman comes in, they send us a list of freshmen about the middle of September, and if there's anybody that we feel like is at risk because they're not coming to class or they're failing everything already, we send their name to the people and they contact them and they try to get them some help. So now some people balk against that and say, well, they're adults, we need to treat them like adults. There's some truth to that, of course. Again, challenge and support. To just let people just flounder is too much challenge. To watch every move they make and intervene all the time is too much support. But we do need some level of monitoring what people do as they grow through young adulthood, whether that's at work or at school, so that we can try to see problems when they happen or maybe even before they happen and deal with them. Third thing there is the notion of a safety net. We know that young adults are going to fail at stuff. We're going to fail at relationships, we're going to fail at education, we're going to fail in lots of ways when we make decisions. So it's important to have some kind of safety net there. That safety net can be lots of different things. It can be a social support group. It can be institutional things on a college campus. It can be parents. It can be family. It can be a church group. Lots of different ways that a safety net can kind of be there for young adults to kind of help them when they do make mistakes or when something does go wrong. And lastly there, the tincture of time. That what that means is that time heals wounds, basically, and that across those years of young adulthood, whether we say they start at 18 and go to 30 or whatever numbers you pick, there are so many changes that happen there and so many different things that can go wrong, but also can be healed through that time period, can get better. You may be someone, or you certainly, I'm sure, know someone who got married when they were 19 or 20 years old and then got divorced by the time they were 22 or 23 because they made a big mistake. Something did not work at all like they thought it would. But then by the time they're 28 or 29 or 30, they're a different person. They're settled more. They make better choices. They have more of a sense of identity, and so we see that happen all the time, in big ways like marriages that fail, but also in small ways like just picking the wrong major, or hanging out with the wrong people for a semester or two and that sort of thing. Time seems to help. So as you move from that 18 or 19-year-old time to 25, we change a lot. And as we change, we tend to get better. So time does seem to help us. Now I want to spend just a little bit of time thinking about Arnett and some of the things that come through that Arnett book. And you've all written about it, and you've discussed it really well on our discussion board. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I want to just maybe highlight a few things that I think are important and give you some a little bit of what I think about some of these things. So first of all, let's just look at these words, the age of identity. If you guys that have been around me for 3 or 4 years know that I think identity is a huge thing. I think it's more important than self-esteem. I think it's the thing that we ought to replace self-esteem with. I think we ought to start teaching our kids about identity instead of how to feel good about themselves. But I know that for a fact that what happens during young adulthood, maybe the major thing that seems to happen, is that we're solidifying an identity. In adolescence, most of us are just bouncing around from identity to identity. We'll talk about that in a minute. But young adulthood is a time when we try to kind of solidify an identity. We try to kind of nail something down and say, this seems to be the person that I'm going to be, maybe for a long time. At the same time we're doing that, it's also an age of instability. We're moving, we're changing, we're growing, we're developing relationships, we're getting out of relationships, we're trying things, whether we're trying majors or trying careers, trying different living arrangements, all kinds of things make us unstable. Or unstable, so it's a time of instability. Now, that of course is not universal, but it's fairly common. And is it bad? Sometimes it gets bad, but it can also be very good, because that instability is a part of our trying to kind of nail down our identity. It's also a time of self-focus. Again, this can become really pathological and dysfunctional, or it can be something that's healthy. We got to kind of know who we are. We got to know what we want and where we're going and what we're about, probably before we can figure out how to share that in a healthy way with someone else. But we can also just become self-consumed. We can also become selfish and egocentric and really unhealthy, in that we kind of feel like I can do what I want. I don't need any responsibility. I don't want any responsibility. And, I'm kind of a free agent, and I can just bounce around and do whatever I want, whatever makes me happy. And life tends to not work great when you live that way. It's a time of being in between. Some of you even wrote about this idea in your book reviews and in your discussion, that you're in that place where you're not financially independent, but you're kind of financially independent. You're not completely geographically independent from family, but you're kind of geographically independent. You're not a kid, but you don't feel like you're completely an adult either, because you're still in school, or you're still dependent on parents or someone for money and that sort of thing. And that's really, really normal. In between is not bad. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. The problem, we think, maybe is that when we feel that in-betweenness, that we don't feel enough tension sometimes, because maybe we're too self-focused, that we don't feel the tension. We feel too much comfort there. And so we're okay with just kind of being kind of an adult, kind of a kid. That's when it seems to get dysfunctional and problematic. It's also a time of possibilities, of course. You're in that spot where you think, I can start an internet company, or I can get a graduate degree, or I can go to work on the farm, or I can become an accountant, or I can go to medical school, or I can be a race car driver. I mean, who knows? Our culture now is just packed with possibilities for people. And so it's really... that's a great thing on one hand. On the other hand, it can almost be debilitating to have so many possibilities and so many opportunities that you can't make choices. Portability is a big deal. The notion that I can move and I am on the move and I can take the stuff with me that I need to from one place to another. That's not just geographically. For example, we want college degrees that are portable. I want a college degree that will help me work in this field and also in this field. I want to take college hours that I can transfer into any university in the world. I want things that are recognized as valid in New York and El Paso and Beijing. I want things that are universal because I don't like limits. And of course, a lot of things are making that happen. Technology increases our portability. I've been on a couple of, 3 or 4 trips overseas in the last 5 or 6 years. Well, the first time I went, we had no cell phone service. Couldn't get any cell phone service, and nobody could get cell phone service when we were in Greece. Well, even 2.5 years later, when we went back to Greece, everybody on the trip had international phone service. Well, that's a huge step in portability, and I mean that's kind of minor, but that kind of thinking and that kind of technology and those kinds of advances show us you ought to be able to talk to people in Greece and to talk to people anywhere else all the time. There shouldn't be limits on what we can do. And we think that way not just in terms of phone service or internet service. We think that way in terms of our training and our education and our characteristics, that we ought to be able to transport those from place to place pretty easily. So we'll come right back and finish working on ARNet.